I'm quite sure that all of us have, at the present time, very much we want to know concerning our own unique evolvement, and to identify especially the various aspects of initiation and enlightenment. And the teacher must go back and back again to the ego, because this seems to be the stumbling block to the understanding of the true reality and of the real. In one Saturday session, I gave all of you a lesson on the crystal, in which I held the crystal here and showed how the points of the crystal related to the radiation of your true and everlasting body, of the points of light. And I showed you how this was actually an energy process which maintained the true body, not only in this life and the forming of yourself, but also the true body after death. Because the more you come into the understanding of spiritual life and life in earth, and of truly bringing these together, and of living in total awareness and understanding as a centered being, aware of God, and always seeking to make union with Him, the more you must learn that as there are many, many members and parts of the physical body, so are there intricate degrees of radiation and energy and points of light in the atom system of eternality in the inner bodies, and that these are refined in various gradations and degrees. In other words, we would say that when we have mastered the etheric body, the outer body becomes the etheric body. And you become so that you look translucent, you radiate the joy and the love and the bliss state of the true and high Buddhi, or that is the higher mind. And so you would also say that when you have mastered the astral body, then that body moves down into what is the etheric and the physical. But these bodies would be more paramount, or that is, would be in more or less in the majority. That is, you would be a person who has the etheric processes while in the physical body and is aware of the dimensions at all time, with the understanding that he is in the true body experience, or that is, the unlimited self. Now, in my little book, Threads of Remembrance, you may undergo an actual experience of understanding certain processes of your ego if you go to the year you are now. In other words, this little book is written to show you that there are 7 major cycles of developing the nature while we are in the earth, and various techniques and processes we undergo through which we can understand and live with these. So you would be 28, then you would go back to 21, and you would read what it says about 28, and you would think on that part of your life and of the forming self and of all you have been doing and the sort of memories you most live with, because it is the character of a person on the physical plane and the spiritual drive of his nature on the spiritual is shown very plainly by his memories and the sort of memories he keeps more often in his mind. In other words, there are memories perhaps that he has on the border of obsession, which he cannot keep from having constantly or living with constantly. Then there are memories which are also of grace. But these are the rare exception in a person who has yet to understand the inner life. The memories on the whole are more or less substantiate all of the physical actions of your life. In other words, when you come to understand your undersoul, you understand the processes of growth and enlightenment with spiritual awareness, you become aware that you must understand that your memories can be your master, and that it is through the erasing of these memories, or that is, exploding them, that you enable to move into fresh alignments of thought processes and emotional aptitudes while in the physical world, because your emotions are imprisoned to your memories. And all that you have in your emotions of frustration and guilt are all tied in your memories. So we must remember that in the knowledge of reincarnation, that we must understand life after death, we must understand life before birth. And when one has finally opened this channel of memories, he is then in a state of initiation where he can overlook and gain a greater dimension of knowledge inside of himself, inside of his memories. And in coming inside of his memory, he comes to be master of his memory. But as long as his memories are inside of him as master, he cannot be free of the memories which drag him more and more downward into the undersoul, the weight of the undersoul. So we cannot stop the memory chain because it is part of the soul, and it is part of eternality, and it is one of the most magnificent things given to man, the conscience and memory. These are the two most wonderful things given to man next to will and the right to choice. And so when we understand that we must truly understand our memories, and we must come to truly understand that they are tied in even before birth. Now we are knowing that in psychology now, they are going directly to knowledge that they are memories from the womb that we have while in the womb, that these are presently subconscious and are deeply seated in the subconscious, which shows, beloved ones, that the subconscious is functioning before we take an actual breath to physical life. Because we bring the memory of subconscious rejection from our mothers or subconscious relationships while in the womb into the world, which form the pattern of our repelling and repulsions, and also form the pattern of our desire and our reaching and our claiming. So we find that then the womb state, particularly in the first phase of being in the womb, is subconscious. Now, we are seeing that the subconscious is also the ruler and motorized action within the undersoul. So it is thus there are processes of undersoul action going on in the womb state between mother and child, and between absorbing all of the life processes which come to us in coming to birth. But before we are entering this earth, in the spiritual worlds, after we have lived a period of time in the spiritual worlds and we prepare to come back to this earth, we enter into what is called the first womb, number one womb, which is the pre-birth matrix, before we are conceived. And that is pre-birth matrix. Then we have to move into the collective subconsciousness of all the various aspects of what we have given up in the last life and what we're going to enter into in the coming life. So in the pre-birth matrix, before you even enter your mother's womb, you are working to become a person or an ego in the physical world. And in this, you have flowing into you the collective unconscious, which flows into you in the pre-birth matrix, in which you are preparing for the journey to the earth by absorbing in the construction of the mental body on that particular plane, in the construction of the emotional body on that particular plane, construction of the matrix of the physical body you are going to inhabit in the earth. Because remember, you are a maker, you are an encloser, and you have the power to, in the plane after death and the plane before birth, you have the power to work with the visualizing process through certain omnipresent helps, angelic and otherwise, into which you are preparing for the matrix of the birth and the type of family you're to be born in, and the race and culture. All these things are preconditioned reflexes within the pre-birth matrix. And that very thing that you undergo in the pre-birth matrix reaches out and selects your parents previous to birth. Now, at this time, there is no ego functioning in the pre-birth matrix. You remember the title of my lesson is How to Reconstruct the Ego. That's the title of my lesson tonight. So we are going to see that in pre-birth matrix, there is no ego. It is all part of what we have extracted from the past as a record of the past, but the ego is not in the functioning state. It is not making a claim. It is more or less in what we call subjective state. This is pre-birth subjective state from how collective unconscious, which compels back to earth, either in a karmic tidal wave or in a grace birth. Because a karmic tidal wave birth is for laggard souls, and a grace life wave is for souls who can, by their grace, select place and parents to be born. That's a grace birth wave. A tidal wave comes when persons who have been laggard and have dragged their feet and have not responded to life and its processes. Now, in the pre-birth matrix, I want to get you to where you're going to realize when ego begins to function. Ego does not function in a child after he has taken its first breath until its 14th year. But soul functions partially. The moment there's movement in the womb, soul begins to function. And then the unconscious, which we bring with us from pre-birth matrix, flows in through the soul power into the babe in the womb, especially in the last months, in the last 3 months of the pregnancy or of its fulfillment in the womb. In other words, up until 4.5 months, we are working with the subconscious primal powers to build a body, a physical body, the brain, the spine, and various nervous system. All this is being done for 4.5 months. After 4.5 months, the soul comes in, pours in, and makes a connection with the embryo. And in that particular time, there is a time in which we move into the state of preparing for birth. And on preparing for birth, we still are under the over-direction of soul. And the soul is not in the child, the soul is over the child. But it is causing the movement in the body, because soul is movement. Soul is superconsciousness movement. And superconscious movement has begun when the babe is now beginning its first quickening and has made its first movement in the womb. No ego yet. So now we are moving to the child when it is born. And of course we know from Niscience studies that some children come in to be yin and some come in to be yang in the first 3.5 years of its life. And you can tell a yin child by it wanting to nurse its mother longer and by its not growing its teeth as quickly as a yang child. A yang child brings the teeth, walks quickly, possibly 9th month on, and that is how you know what sort of child is coming, is here in the life. Then when it is 3.5 years old, the child must change to yang, because always a yin child becomes too active when it becomes 3.5 years old, and when it becomes 7, it then is moving again to yin, 3.5 years, yang, 3.5 years, so forth. But always you can tell a child by what it does through its teeth and through its weaning, what sort of child you have on hand. Then now we are coming into the structure of the child at 7. At 7 years, the child must wean itself and disconnect itself, just as an astronaut out here must disconnect itself and go out into space. Well, a child must disconnect itself from the etheric post-womb state between its mother and itself. That's a post-womb state in which the child is thinking through the mother, obedient to the mother and looks to the mother first. But when the child gradually goes towards its 7th to 9th year, it's beginning to develop into puberty, and then it must take in the father's etheric vibrations, and then it comes into this split, not knowing what polarity it is, not sure that it is boy or girl, and not sure whether it loves mother or father most. It's in this time when we must realize that we have approach to what we call ego. The child, the moment it comes into the split between 7 and 9 and 14, we have this contest between mother and father. And that is the time the child, if it is yin, will turn to its father. If it is yang, it will turn to its mother. And this is the way this happens. So now we are at 14 years of age, and now the ego, which has been over, the soul has been over, and the ego has been over, which the child has developed in the subconscious and unconscious realm, the ego then comes into the glandular system of the child. The glandular system of the child takes over the ego. And in this period of time, the child thinks it knows more than father and mother because it has suddenly developed an ego. It suddenly has developed what it calls the me or the self. What we know now, all spiritual books and literature tell us that the self, the true self, is not the ego. The ego is not the true self. The ego is what is called the not self, and it is called in Niscience the lesser self, and it is also sometimes spoken of as using the lesser mind. But we know that as we get to be 14 years old, we begin to use our intellect to know right from wrong, and this is why in times before this, children who committed any felony or act of were not judged until they were 14 because it was considered they did not have the rational mind, did not know right from wrong, did not have judgment. But in the 14th year, we developed judgment. And in this time, if parents train their child to have right choice, especially to have right choice, the use of judgment all of its life will be a blessing rather than a curse. But if the parent does not teach the child right choice, the ego is going to be heavily inflated, especially if it comes from another life in which ego was vanity, and ego was display, and ego was exploitation. Because a braggart, if it's not healed between dying and next birth in the spiritual planes, by certain restitution laws in the inner planes, it comes in a braggart, and it's going to be a braggart, it's going to be an exploiter, and it's going to be a manipulator. So we know whether our child is a manipulator by character, because a character from past life especially appears in the 14th year. If a child has failed to use character in quality in a former life, he is going to have, at his 14th year, he is going to be a manipulator, and he's going to be possibly still a babe at the breast and yet being abandoned in the other life. So all of this is what is working in the 14th year. So if you are looking into your little book of drafts of remembrance, and you're going back to your 28th year, you're going back to your 21st year, you're going back to your 14th, you're going to say, now, what did I do in those years? What was my attitude? Then you are going to see a lot of karmic things that's going to identify what your ego is working on in this life, and it's going to also identify your general memory stream. In other words, the memory stream that takes you over and rules your life is a curse if it contains the will to get anything at any cost, or at the expense of others, because that is when we show this, is in the ego birth. Now, when we reach the ego stage, that is when the ego comes into the glandular system, and you can say from that moment in life, the ego is in the body. And it is then from that time on that if we have come with other karmas very strong and powerful, we become very unruly in adolescence, and we become very non-understandable to our parents and to others around us, and we become a disturbing element in our environment. Now, many people go into yin when they reach the 14th year, the ego. And the person who goes in the 14th year, for instance, a child 14-year-old is known to go in yin in the 14th year. They do not regain the yang of his ego until the 56th year. In the 56th year, then the person becomes very powerful intellectually, because the ego, we must remember, the ego is the vehicle for the intellect. That is what the ego does. It is a vehicle for your intellect. And the intellect is to give you the knowledge of analysis, of right choice, of righting wrong, as judgment. And it also, the ego is especially, has the thrust of will within it, because in the 21st year, one begins to develop the mental body and unites himself with a certain mental will. And he's going to use his ego in his 21st year if he has been what we call an old soul. By the way, I'm writing on the old soul, a new scripture study. If he is going to be an old soul, he is going to have a wonderful intellect and right choice in his 21st year, and he will always have established his life by the time he is 21. And he will have mature aspirations, and he will have development in this time, which makes him seem to be wise and seems to be much older than his years. But it is in the 28th year especially that we undergo tremendous willpower with the ego. And this is the time usually that we have entered into marriage, and we have many, many burdens extra through which the ego is then being used in a certain way to where it must bear burdens so that it will not be too large. Because when you take a little child into your arms the first time and have become a parent, your ego instantly begins to immediately evaporate into a certain extent. And you begin to realize, if you are really loving that child, the great mistress of life, the great love, and so forth. Because just as marriage is one of the greatest demoters of the ego, a child born to you is also a most divine demoter of the ego. In other words, you immediately are having to die to that lesser self. Now, I've talked to you several times that we must spiritualize the intellect. There's simply no reaching of the spiritual worlds. There's simply no true guidance or clear guidance until we have spiritualized the intellect, which is the vehicle which is the ego's activity vehicle. In other words, the intellect is the ego's activity vehicle. Now, you have a new ego in each life, but you have inherited the mechanics just the way you knew how that you must start walking when you were a baby. You knew how to suck at the breast the first thing. These are all things you developed in other lives, and all things which are part of your human ego spirit. Well, you also have certain ego impulses and compulsions which are natural, which are just simply part of the attributes of having a mind and having an intellect. But when we spiritualize the intellect, we move into the true self. And we no longer judge with harsh judgment. We no longer make selfish choice. We no longer manipulate the forces of life or the consciousness portions of life. In other words, we move beyond the vibration of this outer coating or covering, which we call the ego. Now, I said last week that in the Genesis story, from tribal to family to human, and finally to lesser self-genesis and higher self-genesis, that in lesser self-genesis we have ambivalent genesis. In other words, in lesser self-genesis, it's the ambivalence. It is always that every thought has a very quick negative. In other words, if I'm going to do that, what will it do to me? If he is going to do that, what does he mean? What does he want of me? What is his motive? And if this is so-and-so, so-and-so, until finally you get where you have the retaliative side of the ego, and you use your intellect how to hurt someone else, and you also plot, and you have astral conversations with something they have said to you. You have astral feedback. You're always arguing with somebody in your mind when they've said something that you do not like, or they've asked you to do something that you think is not in your dignity. Then this, of course, is part of this ambivalence. But it is more than that, and it should be really researched in oneself to see if he is really using, or he is presently in lesser self-genesis and truly working in the ambivalent state of self-genesis. Because there has never been a time in the world since we have had great civilization to be destroyed, but in our memory of history and our cultures of developing as collective societies and portions of civilization, we have never had a time in which the ego of the person has been so inflated. It is presently at a time of terrible inflation, and an inflated ego simply does not have any defense against crime or violence or any form of evil. An inflated ego is absolutely non-defensive. It is because it is so sure it is always right, it is so sure that it knows everything, and it's so sure that it's going to get there before everybody else, that it's not looking at the wolves and the various creatures and things ready to attack him out of the underworld of the undersoul. He's not looking at that. He's so sure that he is absolutely right. He is in a state of simply inflation ego. And ego is capable of inflation, very capable of inflation, because it has something to do between one's desire to be more than he is, and also in a desire to thinking that he is more than he is. But this is why the ego ambivalent genesis person simply cannot take Jesus, because Jesus is a sacrificial being. He is telling us that the true religion is renunciation, giving up of the self, and living to help others, to be a good shepherd, to go after that lost sheep while 99 are waiting. We are realizing that an inflated ego is an overconfident person. Now, confidence comes from skills which have been proven to be rightful. And this proof of real confidence, real true confidence in a person and assurance comes from a person who has repeated the same thing over and over, has qualified himself until it is a perfection, and he is moved out of that ego confidence, side of ego confidence. He is then just a vehicle, an instrument, or that which works out of itself the perfection without thought of what it's going to do for him, but only what it can do to help others. Because this is the whole Jesus life, is what to do to help others, what to do to walk in this world and bring peace. Well, when you are understanding, the ego, by the way, is a liar. It is a great imaginative liar. It can do the most fantastic work on you. It can make you think that you have been offended when you haven't been offended at all. And what we don't realize that when we have overconfidence, there is an astral boxing glove out there waiting for our nose every minute. So this is what we must realize, that humility is one of the first virtues. And it is, if you have a true humility, you are going to look at the boxing glove in the face, but you're not going to go towards it and think, you can't hit me, you can't hurt me. In other words, one of the weaknesses in the old-fashioned metaphysics is that always they felt that they did not have to die, they were superior to death, and that they had the right and privilege to have anything they desired just by thinking about it. Well, that is the boxing glove out there, the astral boxing glove, waiting to give you a true fallout, and you're going to hit the ropes. That is true. So the thing that I'm seeing in reconstructing the ego, we must know we have other bodies. We must recognize it and be willing to research that in ourselves. We must be willing to know our memories as being about 70% false and enlarged by ego desire to be thought well of, not only to ourselves, by others. There are so many traps in the world that are waiting for the person who wants to be approved of in everything, and also in the person who cannot be corrected. These are tremendous things that are waiting to truly knock you and to knock you from the path. But the moment that you travel light, the moment that you realize what Jesus meant by taking his yoke, and it's that dropping all these memories, childhood memories in which you had sister or brother who offended you, father or mother who offended you, or teachers in classes who offended you, or playmates who offended you, all these memories continue to come up. They're just like the toaster that keeps popping up all the time. They are coming to the surface of your memory, and they're interfering with the true self, which is back of the ego. Now, the true self is eternal. It has lived in other eternity systems. It came into this earth system and solar system as if the earth were a womb through which it incubated until the time it came to what we call physical manifestation. Now, the true self is like the inside of a flower which projected from itself the outer buds. And the fantasy that makes us think that these buds are the true self is that there is a vibration that stands between us in the ego. The ego puts off a vibration that makes us think that it is the true self. In other words, it is a character on the stage, but it is not the true actor who is playing the part. In other words, the true self is the actor, but the character he is playing is the ego. So in every life, you play another character and you play another part. And you have to realize that the Eastern teachings are right when they say that Maya, or matter as it's called in the West, Maya is an illusion. It is not an illusion anymore. In other words, when one understands what Maya is and understands how only the ego can do its work for the true self in matter. The true self is not yet in matter. The true self is in spiritual, superconscious stuff, substance. And this is a bliss quality, the true self. Now, this bliss self cannot stand gravity, life in matter and physical life. But the understudy, or that is the one playing the part, is the one, or that is playing the character. The character is that one which is the ego. And the ego is giving off always this vibration, which is called a closure vibration, which means a veiling vibration, to veils from us the true self. Now, the only way we meet the true self is in sleep and in meditation, and in moments of bliss when we are worshiping and making union with God. And that is what meditation is for, is to make union with the true self and merge ourselves in the divine self of God. But the ego is a vehicle that is covered each life it builds more and more vibration all of his experiences. And of course, if you have a child and you're praising it all the time, and the praise is just blind praise, because so many parents use blind praise and think their children cannot make mistakes. But the true praise is when a parent teaches a child to look at his mistakes and to know that these mistakes are merely opportunities to learn and to rise above and beyond. And we must teach our children this, and must teach them that everything is a series of learning, because learning does not ever start with just one aspect. Learning through the power of memory is a continuing process which never ceases, and which has been from the very beginning. We took on the closure skin and accepted an ego appearance body so that we could work on this Maya plane and live within it. Reconstructing the ego. My first suggestion would be to read the little book, Dress of Remembrance. Go to your years, how old you are, and each day for a little while, start with your years, say you're 28, go back and see what you have done all of these 7 years. And see really the memory thread there. What was your real, what was the pull of your ego? Where was it pulling you to? Why was it doing this? Well, the ego has a great motor in it, which is called desire. And desire motivates the ego. So you'll say to yourself, what is desire? Why do I want this? Is this a real thing, or is this a fantasy? Is this the tinsel on the tree, or is this the true diamonds on the tree? And so we then begin to learn that we can go back and see motivation from 28 to 21. Then 21, we'll see, oh, I was such an upstart then. Why didn't I do this, or why didn't I do that? Why did I make all of those mistakes? They were just bubbles, and I got off on one of those bubbles. And you know there are people who live in astral bubbles to the time they are dead. And they are always telling themselves these romances. In the astral planes after death, you are finding people in the lower planes who are still living in that astral bubble state are telling themselves how everything they have done has been so wonderful, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Because you know, if you are going to get insulted by someone, because you know that when you are a spiritual disciple or an initiate, you are never surprised, and you will never permit yourself to be personally hurt by anyone in something that hurts your pride, because pride is the walking stick of the ego. Pride is always there to hold you up. When everything else fails, you're going to go back to pride. It's always there. And you're going to find out that some people live totally by pride. Now, pride forms salt in the body, by the way. It forms too much sodium in the body. And that is which affects us in certain liquids. Now, anything to do with liquids, always in your emotions. So emotion is not a mental attribute. Emotion, pride is not a mental attribute. It is an emotional attribute. It is a oozy desire to be right about everything. That is what pride is. See? So bring that up to yourself the next time you're going back in your memory and see. Now, another thing to reconstruct the ego. Now, if you reconstruct the ego, can you really do it in one life? And the answer is yes. With the Niscience practices, you can totally reconstruct your ego. And you can only do it by achieving spiritual intellect. And spiritual intellect is always when you're in the state of thinking, to think on a higher level rather than being pulled down by these memories of expectations of being hurt, of being pushed around, or of all these bruises that you carry. You simply have to drop them. You simply have to live in a high vibration of expectancy of the good in every person, no matter how evil they may make their face to you. There is a button on everyone to push, a vibrational button. that everyone has that you can push, no matter how mean he is or what part he is playing in his character of the ego. So, and that is sometimes you're surprising what it is that you touch it. But sometimes you can have one of these most wicked men crying like a baby because you have touched that vibrational button. So you've got your own vibrational button, don't forget it. And that is, in the certain schools of the past, there are two things that were taught to us through the Eastern schools. You must die to your ego. Well, if you're going to die to your ego, you're going to be an intellectual incompetent. You're just going to be a passive vegetable sitting on a lettuce leaf. But that is not what yoga is. Yoga is not sitting on a lettuce leaf. Yoga is getting out and planting the lettuce. So we are seeing now that if we are going to have knowledge of reconstruction, we're going to have to say to ourselves, I will do it now. It is going to happen. I'm going to look into my memories with an honest searchlight. I'm going to see with the eye single, and I am not going to be, let us say, merciful to my own evil. I'm not going to nourish it, because to nourish it, I'm going to poison everything, because now I'm in a position, I'm in a sheen, and I know. So if I know, I cannot drag my feet any longer. And my knowing must make knowing out of the science of knowing, out of the science of learning, I am a knower. That is Niscience. So it is now that each thing must be self-realized about self. Ego is not self. Ego is the not self. Ego is a temporary intellectual vehicle we use to compete in the world and to master the earth and world forces and the forces of our own consciousness. That's what ego is. So ego is blessed. We should not kill it. We should not kill it. Then they are saying you should give it to your teacher. You should give your ego to your teacher. Well, for a brief while, your teacher does not have or ever accept your ego, but you lease it for a time out to your teacher. Because the teacher, when they come into your life in their aura, they become a mirror to your undersoul, and they enable you to force everything up into the memory action so that you can see everything clearly, and for a while you will hate yourself because of the things that are coming up. It is things you have not digested, and you have to bring up into your consciousness, and you have to confront with them, and that is part of the fiery trial we undergo, and the burning up is the honest admission that we can make mistakes, the honest admission that we have been misled, the honest admission that we cannot blame a single person for what has happened to us, that everything happening to us has come because of some force we have set into motion. And we are going to learn how to bring those forces into other direction, and then to have a pathway before us, a straight way, a pathway before us through which we can live and have harmony with life itself and accept the earth instead of looking at it as a tremendous egg we are in that is full of nothing but howling and yelling and boiling and surfacing all the time and never coming to rest. Because if you were to look at the forces of nature, you would see they never come to rest, but they are in harmony to each other. All of the forces of nature have a harmony, and they all work with the timing, and that is the way your nature should coordinate with nature, nature's process of order. All of this is a part of life and construction. Constructing the ego is deliberately looking into one's own self and seeing the frailties of the ego, of it being misdirected through wrong desiring. So if you have, for instance, a desire to remain in a fixed idea which is in your ancestry, and you come up against great truths, for instance, like going into another vista of consciousness, and it's like going into another plane in the spiritual world, and you have got all these conceptual things in your consciousness you've inherited from your ancestors, and you simply will not deviate from that because that was said to be right, that was said to be right. But what we have to realize that the ego is a progressive vehicle. It is a new vehicle in each life, and the ego also is constantly progressing in one life to make the ego to come to birth in the next life. Because it is said that men who beget children, when they are past 40, beget the finest minds. In other words, the children who come are the most highly developed mentally, and they have great wisdom. And this is the same way with us, that the more mature you are as an ego in a former life, the more wisdom you will have in your intellect, and more spiritualized it will be as a vehicle to interpret to the world what your true self is, because that's what the ego will eventually do, will interpret to the world what the higher self is. And when that comes, the ego will then just be a bubble-like figure for the higher self to live in this physical earth. But in the meantime, we are making this earth. We are through our thoughts and our desires and our consciousness, we are constantly making the earth a sphere of consciousness. And the earth itself is a living, vital vehicle through which humanity becomes the total soul expression of God. So we have to realize that the centered self in you is the true self, that the intellect, when spiritualized, permits that true self to shine before all men, as Jesus shone before all men. So you cannot say, well, that was just my ego. It doesn't matter. I'll catch up on this when I go into another life, but right now the ego, I just couldn't help myself. That was my ego. Well, St. Paul was saying that. He said, the things that I do, I would do not, and so forth and so forth. Well, this is what I call an ego cop-out. Because it is, if we can blame it on the ego, say, well, forgive me, but just my old ego, it was sticking out too much and so forth. Well, that's all right for one time, but don't try it 3 times because you won't get away with it. In other words, you're going to have to, sooner or later, you're going to have to eat humble pie. And that is very bitter. You know, it's stated in the book of Revelation how we are going to eat the book of life, both bitter and sweet. Well, that's what we're doing, both bitter and sweet, and that's an ego manufacturer. It's what it is, life bitter and sweet, and it's what we have inherited from the egos of our ancestors. That's what they leave us. They leave us that possession, and it overshadows our ego, and we take it on when we're 14, and then we start fooling around with it, and then we say, oh, I have such a wonderful willpower, and I can do so and so. That's the first thing when you discover you have a willpower, that you can make choice. And then the next thing you're going to realize that the other side of that is mediation, in which you have the power to mediate for others or to be a peace person between those who are not at peace. Become a mediator. You have mastery of the ego when you do this. In other words, when you are reconstructing your ego and you're using it in a spiritualized intellect action, especially when you are a mediator between enemies or between those who are separated or those who are not reconciled, when you become a true mediator. But when you take sides with a person, you are split. And you are going to be a split ego. Because the moment that you take over the cause of other persons, which they think is justified, you don't know the karma way back of this person, why he's been hit. You don't know what he brings. Only the angels and God knows what he brings, or why he is motivated to do this or that, or why his ego is representing him as this or that. It's because back there's a trail of all sorts of motives which have come to the head in an ego. Can the ego be destroyed by any physical thing? Can it be destroyed by constant suggestions or too much analysis? Can the ego be not fully awakened through a whole life? The answer is yes to all of these. If a person is constantly criticizing you, they are deflating your ego, and it is as bad as if you were inflating it with overconfidence and overassuredness. So if you have a person that's, as they are saying nowadays in modern times, constantly putting you down, he put me down, or he put me off, or something. Well, whatever, but it is, if you constantly have a person like that, run from that person. Get away. Don't stay near them. Get out of their sights. Don't stay with that person. Walk out. Because the person is inflating his own ego by deflating yours. He is making himself big by making you little. So don't stay with such a person. God wants to make you big. He wants to make you into a being. He wants you to know that he's given you the ego as a lease, term lease in each life, and that you earn it by the way you use your precious intellect. And the intellect is precious. The right to know wrong or right. This is a great blessing of God. But when one uses God always and uses Jesus as his blueprint by which he compares his action, that's what we mean by the Jesus ethic. We lay all of our actions alongside of the life of Jesus. For instance, there are certain persons who are doing certain things and calling it spiritual. Would Jesus act that way? Would Jesus take drugs the way some of these semi-yogas are doing? Or yogis are doing? Would Jesus do some of these immoral things that so many people are doing and calling it religious? Jesus would not do these things. You have to lay your actions up along the line of Jesus. And in that, you then are in the Jesus ethic. Would Jesus sell your spiritual services? Would Jesus sell these services to you? Did he ever ask anybody for any money? The answer is no. And this is so with anything we do that is in our natures. Put it alongside of Jesus' blueprint. In that way, you stay in the ethic. In that way, you harm no one. You live in ahimsa. You live in harmlessness. And in this, you are preparing for the Prince of Peace to be in you as a home, because that is what every person works in the ego, to get the intellectualized spiritual and to enable the Lord of Lords to enter our hearts. And it's only with the self is at home with the Lord of Lords, the true self. The true self begins with buddhi, the higher mind. Spiritualized intellect takes you to buddhi. Buddhi body, or the higher mind body, is total bliss vibration. When you enter that, you feel bliss, you feel joy, you are in transcendence, and you are in God. And that is what you experience when supernatural powers begin to function in you as spiritual gifts. If the ego comes into this at all, you are in great danger. If you are thinking that your spiritual gift exceeds anyone else, or that your method of finding God exceeds anything or anyone else, you are in danger. If you are thinking that everything your family has is better than the family next door, you are in danger. And everything that you are doing, this self-preservative thing which is in the ego, this thinking that we are going to live forever and not facing death as a reality. 2 days ago, I lost a sister. She passed from this world. She was not religious. She had tremendous charisma. She had no belief in God. Now in the spiritual worlds, where would she be? She would be sleeping, because she was asleep in this life. She will be asleep in that life until she awakens with a tidal wave to return to this earth. This is what will happen. Having my insight and knowing what is happening to her, prayers and holding in the light and thinking of her essential good and her grace will eventually awaken her in that plane in which she will be taught certain things about life and death. She will come into the hands of the white brothers, and they will help her to return to this earth and to use the grace that she had in this earth, the grace of very much money, the grace of very much charm, prestige, and attraction. That prestige must be used in the next life to honor God. Prayers sent to such persons. That is why the ritual for the dead is most important. The understanding of the death is very important. Understanding of what happens after life is important. And every Saturday we are giving that opportunity to understand and to know. And it is in that time that the angels are very much with us, very much with us. Well, beloved ones, to reconstruct your ego, be honest with yourself. To reconstruct your ego, look upon time as the opportunity to master memory. Look upon dreams to give you another sort of memory altogether once you've made the dedication to reconstruct your ego. Can you repair an automobile? Certainly. Can you repair an ego? Assuredly. But you can only repair it when you have the functioning of the spiritualized intellect to be the carpenter or the tool maker of its repairing. And when this intellect is spiritualized, the soul can speak into the mind and into the body, and voluminous powers and graces fall. If you are plotting a course that you're absolutely sure that now you are single, you want to get married again, go through the process of seeking to reconstruct your ego and attract this time the right sort of husband. Or if you haven't got a husband at all, ask yourself, what is the matter with that inflation? Can I find out how to bring it into balance? Only by using the higher mind and calling upon the soul in the higher self and God through prayer and meditation can you bring this reconstruction to be honest with yourself. There was a metaphysics which planned to have everything and said you only have to think to get a certain type of house. Why do you think I have lived over in that little place over there all these years? For the simple reason I was not interfering with God. I was letting God plan what he wanted to do for me. My roots are in God, not in a house, not in a dress, not in a car, not in anything physical. So we must do this with a whole and complete faith, because once you have this, God will give you everything, as Jesus said. He said, to do these things, you will have all things, and that is true. But you have to do these things. But so many want to jump over the doing of these things. They want to have these things now. You know, when I was a girl, my father teased me a great deal because I always ended my sentences with now. Because I was the final word, and no one could say anything against the final word when I said it. So now I see how that positive now can so often keep you from having the great and beautiful things that will come to you instantly and quickly through a childlike faith is surrendered to the divine flow of life, to let the flow inflow in you, to let it bless you and flow through you, and to let everything be love. Woman is a vehicle of love. Man is a vehicle of will and power, the yang state. And man, the yang side of our nature, is the reasoning side of nature. And the yin side of our nature is the intuitive side of our nature. So if we can bring reason into intuition in a marriage, we have the divine creator mind marriage in us, in our nature. This is a very necessity. Now, do you like too much sugar? Ego. And do you like excessive, everything excessive? Ego. How long are you going to keep it? Not any longer than sundown. It's going to perish before the night. Everything perishes on the Maya plane, but everything stays the same on the Maya plane. That's a riddle we all have to unsolve, or have to solve. So, but when we get the balance of accepting change as being the way on which we are unchangeable, eternal. Death is change, birth is change, marriage is change, a new job is change, a new insight is change, but of all, the most valuable of all is the new insight for the ambivalent Genesis mind. Insight, where he can reconstruct his ego and face himself as he is. But he doesn't have to slice himself off on chunks. He must especially realize that he does it by letting the I single work for him and standing back of these things which have so cluttered up and taken away from him the true alignment to his true and high self, where it is all bliss through the Buddha gate. So, beloved ones, that is all I'm going to speak of tonight on reconstruction. I've left some seeds for you. A while back, I had a vision, and I was a great-sized mother turtle. And I had come in from high tidal wave of the ocean to lay my eggs. And I was going and digging, and I planted my eggs, and then I covered them up, and then I went back into the ocean. Now that is all I am doing in your life. I have planted the eggs. They're going to hatch out into little from physical vitalities, but yet all worlds are needed, or God would not have created them. He created this physical world for you to live in, through which you are challenged so that you can build spiritual muscle and a sort of consciousness that can enable you to know true joy in this world. And he has built all these things in your nature, a most marvelous place to discover. If you really gave yourself to whole, total, spiritualized, intellectual self-analysis in the Buddha light, and you brought it into the transcendent light, it would merge it all into God. So we have to let God merge into us. But we must seek with the last breath to always be God-knowing. Never to stand away from God-knowing in our consciousness. Never for 1 minute or time to look on any incident of life unless God is in it with you. Paying a bill, buying new shoes, whatever. God with you in it. And that intuition that you are wanting so well, and that true reason that comes from the pure spiritualized intellect, all of this will come. I have seen children 5 years old have spiritualized intellects until they were interfered with the mismatch that goes on in their puberty years. And they would have absolutely spiritualized intellect and know even more than their parents what was right. They would come in with that sort of knowing. They were not yet hampered by the ego. Well, the ego, beloved one, gets its biggest bust when we're 49 years old. And that's the time when it's really going to be fractured. So we must all wait for it, because it is going to move in on us and show us what a deflationary job can be done in this world if we have been hypnotized by thinking it is everything. Because at 49 years of age, you enter the master initiation, which is deflation of your ego. In your 56th year, you enter into the pure mind, the true mind. You become an adult in the sense of Maya in the 56th year. In your 35th year, you make choice whether you're going to follow the left-hand or the right-hand path. In the 42nd year, you have a boohoo time with the ego. That's when the tears come. That's when the weeping gets inside, and sometimes it gets outside. And sometimes it's not good on the outside. It's better to be left alone in the inside. But when it gets in the steamy side, you have to really watch out. That's when the explosion comes. But at 49, that's when you get the explosion. You decided, well, I haven't done as much with this woman as she hasn't paid off to me as much as I thought she would. I'm going to divorce her. Or that is what the woman says at that time. I'm going to walk out and leave my children, my grandchildren, and so forth and so forth. So here we are, the ego again. We have to realize that we are loaned everything in this world, everything. We are loaned everything. We have a lease agreement with God. And if we have not been good leasees, it's going to be harder on us the next time. We probably will be a serf or a slave the next time if we haven't been a good leasee in this life. So, beloved ones, God be with you. Now I'm going to give you a little codicil, a little ending about the Iran situation, as I used to do in old times. Always end with something about what we call the real world. It's too real for me. Well, first, you know, I have told you about the Ganharas, the little angels that are very small, and how they work to help you. And now, in Persia, in the time of the Zoroaster period, there was a tremendous power of magic existing, which was out of the memory of Lemuria. And this magic was after certain formulas. And even today, certain books are lying around, which are very trashy, by the way, but lying around about, there's a book on a sort of a semi-magic book of Moses, which is definitely a black art, but it's not anything to do with Moses at all. But in this period of time, in the Zoroaster period, there was a great assistance for a certain kind of the Deva kingdom, which was part of the duality kingdom, called the Jinns, Jinni, you know, G-E-N-I-E or J-I-N-N. These are not like the Ganharas. They are very different in that they can work with forces, and they can work with actual tangible substances to change transenergized substances. Now, this is what the man who is the Ayatollah in Iran is doing. He has the jinn power. And this, I told you that he had put a screen over the desert, and that he had damaged the planes and so forth, and caused these things to happen by his knowledge of his screen put out by these jinn forces. And that is what is working with him. And this is why it is so difficult for people who have never had any knowledge of the inner forces and the energized forces of the Deva kingdom. They simply cannot understand how a person can have such a tremendous will as to use these elemental forces, because they are really elemental, but they are intelligent. And they are forces which can absolutely put a wall of electricity down, and no one can go through that wall. No matter how much you desire it, unless you have, as it was given to us in the myth tales, in the magic word. And the magic word we know to be spiritual knowing. Spiritual awareness as God, the only power. And the only way these forces work, and they work in the parapsychology levels through the older Africans and through different ones who live in the Lemuria consciousness, still live in it in Polynesian islands and various places, they understand these laws. They understand what Carl Jung called the Bush laws, which he knew to be psychic. And this is what is being used in Iran. Now, we must especially pray for those who are hostages in a common body mediation prayer, because they have reached a state now in their consciousness of a passive psychology which is very dangerous for their minds in the future. And this same sort of power this man has brings people into that condition. It is in all the people. That is why they're acting with such hysteria. They're not any of them acting with rationality, exposed on both sides by the Russians and on the other sides by nations who are seeking to come in. They're not even seeing the reality of this, because they are also in the same influence. It's like a frozen situation. The only thing that can help this and can heal it is prayer, mediation, and as I said last week, to see every one of these people as a spiritual identity, as a fellow human being in the world, and as that right and dignity and degree of life which is divine in every human, in every person having a face, eyes. Even an animal, when you look into his eyes, he has something divine. The eye of the human being is filled with his own divinity. And to look in the eye of anything living is to see God. If you are thinking God, you find him in the eye of a person. Not in his actions always, but in his eye. And this is why some people will not look you in the eye, because they do not have God in the eye. They fear the eye. So, beloved ones, I'm seeing spiritually a canopy of golden light, of healing, a great umbrella in that whole area. And if we can, in the United States of America, take our greed out of our antagonisms we have now, the greed for their oil, because it is not our oil. Our oil is right in God, which we are getting ready to find, not oil, because we have bled the earth to death. The earth is in danger for having taken too much oil from it. It is not our oil, it is God's oil. But God is withdrawing it from us. We must get the message that we must get other energies which are here abundant to bring the happy society, the happy technology, which is going to see man out of atheism and out of all these horrible separateness and hatreds that go from greed. We have no right to reach over to any country and decide that we can make war with them just for oil. We have no right spiritually or morally. But we have a divine right to look to God to inspire the minds in this America who are here. They are here. The minds to create that which reaches us out into energies of refinement and sensitivity, which make us more communicable in every way. We have gathered into our lives tremendous knowledge of how to do things, but we have lost the sound, the word, the code of how to use things. And it is greed and separateness. Well, it is to the credit of our nation that we are riding less in cars, that we are using less gas. That is very commendable. That shows that the American is intelligent, but they do not often think he is intelligent. When I say they, you can use whom you will and choose whom you will to think of they. But this I know, what is happening in Vietnam, what is happening in Iran, all of it is to get us to move up. to move up. We are the nation needing to move up. So, beloved ones, we do not need oil. We need minds in God creating to bring the energy. It is going to take a few years, yes, but it's coming. It's going to happen. And that is why it is happening the way it is. That's why there's a stalemate. That is why there's no movement. That is why that is total separation. And in the meantime, the guardian angels and recording angels are hovering over the situation to keep war from coming, which would be a religious war between the Islam and the Christian world. That is what is hovering. So our prayers must be to not condemn. Our prayers must be to praise God and to know His providence is meeting the need, and that the need is going to be that which takes from us heavy burdens we have taken in the last few years by being separative to many of nations, being so separative. That separateness is ending, as I have told you. The creeds between religions are now lifting, and that which is between races is lifting, and that which is in between continents is lifting. This is not by man's doing, but it's by God's doing. All of my books tell you this. And that is the goal that is present now on the human spirit level. But we get frustrated because we are pounded constantly with the ideas of that which is separative. But we must realize we do not live in a separative eternal. We live in an interrelated eternal. And that is interconnected. Every cell in your body is created with a cell system in every other body. Everything that works and functions in you is functioning in every other functioning being. The limitation man places upon his own consciousness will limit his behavior if he does not believe in God as the design. God is the design. So, beloved ones, what we speak of here is not national, it is spiritual. All nations now are presently coming under the rod to understand, and there are nations which presently are dying. For instance, we have England, which has gone through a demotion ever since it released India, because that is polarity balance of karma. It was inevitable that England would begin to die the moment that she moved from India, because India was her life. But she was usurping life. She was moving beyond the barriers of that which is individually right for man and his own continents. So we have to realize that everything in this time is so powerful and is so expanded and so quick, so moving, we do not always understand it when it gets into our individual concerns and our individual desires. This again is ego, when we think that our individual desires to have more gas is ego also, that we think it is our right. And then we overlook all these other deviations because we just think it's our right. But it is a right that right out here in the great intelligible is a solution. And the solution must only come through minds who are competent to understand that the divine plan is never ceasing in its functioning. And there's a divine plan right now to solve the solutions of our discontents and separateness, as there is in your own life, and bringing out its true virtue. So that is the news for today. And beloved ones, I love all of you, and let's have a mantra. My life in the rainbow diadem.
My life in the rainbow diadem
is moving joy.
Is moving joy.
In which the height and the climb.
In which the height and the climb.
And the good.
And the good.
Will bring the pure unto me.
Will bring the pure unto me.
And I will see the vision and the glory of God.
And I will see the vision and the glory of God.
Manifested in the quickening of my own soul and mind.
Manifested manifested in the quickening of my own soul and mind.
Pour down thy grace upon me, Almighty God,
Pour down thy grace upon me, Almighty God.
and let me see thine omnipresence
Let me see thine omnipresence
in all situations, in all beings.
in all situations, in all beings.
Peace, brother.
Peace, brother.
Amen.
Amen.
God bless you, beloved ones. I love you.